well could be this black wolf. Tonight, we're looking for a sign of the black wolf.
In recognizing a communist, physical appearance counts for nothing. If he openly declares himself to be a communist, we take his word for it. If a person consistently reads and advocates the views expressed in a communist publication, he may be a communist. If a person supports organizations which reflect communist teachings, or organizations labeled communist by the Department of Justice, she may be a communist. If a person defends the activities of communist nations while consistently attacking the domestic and foreign policy of the United States, she may be a communist. If a person does all these things over a period of time, he must be a communist.
Hello once again, thank you for joining me. This is Rob Farrell with the Black Wolf Podcast, and today's topic is the New World Order. I know what you're thinking. Rob's got his tinfoil hat on. Yes, I do. I always do. But the New World Order is not a conspiracy theory. It used to be, but it's not anymore. It's real, and it's happening. I'll give you a brief rundown of what the New World Order is. The New World Order is a plan by the elite, by the powerful, I hate to use this word, but by the globalists who want a one-world government where everybody's liberties have been taken down to a lower level than what they are now. And there's one set of laws, one currency, all this for the entire planet. And the entire planet is governed by, I doubt one person, but probably just a few people. And that's the basic premise of the New World Order. Now, it had its foundations a long time ago. And we were actually warned about this. Well, we were warned about the beginnings of it. When President Eisenhower was leaving office and President Kennedy was coming into office, Eisenhower gave a State of the Union address in which he spoke about the military-industrial complex. Here's a part of that speech.
A vital element in keeping the peace is our military establishment. Our arms must be mighty, ready for instant action, so that no potential aggressor may be tempted to risk his own destruction. Our military organization today bears little relation to that known of any of my predecessors in peacetime, or indeed by the fighting men of World War II or Korea. Until the latest of our world conflicts, the United States had no armaments industry. American makers of plowshares could, with time and as required, make swords as well. But we can no longer risk emergency improvisation of national defense. We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. Added to this, 3.5 million men and women are directly engaged in the defense establishment. We annually spend on military security alone more than the net income of all United States corporations. Now, this conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience. The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We recognize the imperative need for this development. Yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. Our toil, resources, and livelihood are all involved. So is the very structure of our society. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together.
And here's what President Eisenhower was talking about. During World War II, the U.S. government approached private companies such as General Motors and Ford Motors to build weapons of war, because they already had the assembly lines, the factories, the supply lines, and everything set up. So the government would design a tank, send it to General Motors, and General Motors would start assembling them on their assembly lines, or bombers, or whatever. And that's what he meant by plowshares. Once the war was over, they went back to making automobiles, or whatever the case may be. But what he was worried about was a trend that he was seeing, that certain private companies were going into business specifically to supply the United States with arms and armament. Companies like Raytheon, Boeing, Lockheed Martin, defense contractors, what we would call them today. But Eisenhower realized that the more the country depended on these private companies for all of their arms and armament, the more power and money these private companies would have. And in today's world, money equals power. And he knew that these people would get powerful enough to eventually have a control of the government, which is basically what he said. And that's what's happening today. And these are the part of the architects of what we are calling the New World Order. Now, that term just wasn't made up by some nut job. Listen to this.
Certain that we stand at a defining hour. Halfway around the world, we are engaged in a great struggle in the skies and on the seas and sands. We know why we're there. We are Americans, part of something larger than ourselves. For 2 centuries, we've done the hard work of freedom, and tonight we lead the world in facing down a threat to decency and humanity. What is at stake is more than one small country. It is a big idea, a new world order, where diverse nations are drawn together in common cause to achieve the universal aspirations of mankind.
That was President George H.W. Bush in an address to Congress. He made that speech September 11th, 1991. But he's not the only person since then to have used that term. Here's British Prime Minister Tony Blair.
Let me summarize my argument to you this evening. Under the momentum of globalization, the world is opening up, and at an astonishing speed. Old boundaries of culture, identity, and even nationhood are falling.
Here's President Mikhail Saakashvili, of Georgia.
Fighting for its survival, but we are also fighting for world peace, and we are also fighting for future world order.
The worst thing was that I was standing there with my people, they were bombed, and I was just targeted like them, and as elected president, official in charge of their protection, I couldn't do anything about it. But the point here is, it's not about me, it's about the idea of freedom. It's about the future of the whole region. It's about the future of Europe and a new world order.
Here's Barack Obama.
In this new century, Americans and Europeans alike will be required to do more, not less. Partnership and cooperation among nations is not a choice. It is the only way, the one way, to protect our common security and advance our common humanity. That is why the greatest danger of all is to allow new walls to divide us from one another. The walls between old allies on either side of the Atlantic cannot stand. The walls between the countries with the most and those with the least cannot stand. The walls between races and tribes, natives and immigrants, Christians and Muslims and Jews cannot stand. These now are the walls we must tear down.
Here's Jose Barroso. He's the president of the European Commission.
This is a global financial crisis that requires global solutions.
In the financial crisis, Europe is leading the way towards a global solution. Today, Europe can propose the principles and rules that will shape a new global order. The kind of occasion where the crisis calls into question old certainties and minds are more open to change. These are very special moments. The goal should be to devise a system of global financial governance adapted to the challenges of the 21st century.
So these are just a few people, world leaders, that have been using this term. Now here's another one. It's Henry Kissinger.
Are we at one of those moments in history in which there is the necessity for a new world order? A, because of what's taken place in the Middle East, the rise of different kinds of groups, and B, what's happened in Asia, meaning that there has been a shift from the West to the East.
There's a need for a new world order.
Now what exactly are they talking about? They're talking about a one world government. That's what they're talking about. And they've already started to implement this in some places. The European Union is a good example. Okay, all the different countries of Europe together as one entity, one currency, the euro, and it seems to be working for them so far. But what they really want is to take away some of our privileges, to make everybody, bring everybody down to an equal level, take away the freedom some people enjoy, bring that down and raise up some other people to some things that they may not have. Personally, I'm not willing to give up any freedoms, but it's not going to be up to me. It's not going to be up to you. The core founding body of this new world order is going to be the United Nations. All right. This is President Obama addressing the United Nations. Listen to what he says.
But we have to put our money where our mouths are. And we can only realize the promise of this institution's founding to replace the ravages of war with cooperation if powerful nations, like my own, accept constraints. Sometimes I'm criticized in my own country for professing a belief in international norms and multilateral institutions, but I am convinced that in the long run, giving up some freedom of action, not giving up our ability to protect ourselves or pursue our core interests, but binding ourselves to international rules over the long term enhances our security.
See what I mean? You know, we're supposed to give some things up to make the world a better place. You know, I don't agree with that. Not one bit. But that's what's coming. And it's the rich people, the really, really rich people that have the power that are instituting this. I'll throw a name out there. The United Nations is sitting on land in New York City. Land that was purchased and donated to the city for the very purpose of putting the United Nations headquarters there. That land was purchased by John D. Rockefeller for $80 million in today's money. Then he just turned around and gave it to the city of New York. And that's where the current United Nations headquarters are. They temporarily had headquarters in Rockefeller Center in New York, but their permanent home is on that land bought by John D. Rockefeller, negotiated by Nelson Rockefeller. Now, we know they're going towards a one-world currency, and they're going to use some kind of financial crisis to implement this. I mean, our Federal Reserve System is on the verge of collapse. By the way, the Federal Reserve Bank is privately owned. The United States government has nothing to do with it. The Federal Reserve Bank is owned by other private banks, which are controlled by private citizens. That's an awful lot of power. I mean, you control not the largest economy in the world, but one of the most powerful economies in the world. I think Japan's got the most powerful economy in the world, but we're a close second. And you've got that power and control of private citizens. And that's exactly what Eisenhower was warning us about. Now, another thing the New World Order wants to do: population control. That means less people on the planet. Now, here's David Rockefeller addressing at a dinner for United Nations ambassadors. Listen to what he has to say.
Ironically, however, the very innovations that are making possible dramatic improvements in human well-being are also creating new problems which raise the specter of an alarming and possibly catastrophic disaster to the biosphere we live in. And herein lies the dilemma that we all face. Let me illustrate. Improved public health has caused the world's infant mortality rate to decline by 60% over the last 40 years. In the same period, the world's average life expectancy has increased from 46 years in 1950s to 63 years today. This is a development which, as individuals, we can only applaud. However, the result of these positive measures is a world population that has risen during the same short period of time geometrically to almost 6 billion people and could easily exceed 8 billion by the year 2020. The negative impact of population growth on all of our planetary ecosystems is becoming appallingly evident. The rapid growing exploitation of the world's supply of energy and water is a matter of deep concern, and the toxic byproducts of widespread industrialization have increased atmospheric pollution to dangerous levels. Unless nations will agree to work together to tackle these cross-border challenges posed by population growth, overconsumption of resources, and environmental degradation, the prospects for a decent life on our planet will be threatened. The recent UN meeting in Cairo is appropriately focused on one of these key issues, population growth. But the controversies which have erupted at the conference illustrate the problem of coming to grips with issues that are deeply divisive and which have a profound moral dimension. The United Nations can and should play an essential role in helping the world find a satisfactory way of stabilizing world population and stimulating economic development in a manner that is sensitive to religious and moral considerations. Economic growth is, of course, an inevitable corollary of a growing population and is essential to improved standards of living. But without careful coordination, unrestrained economic growth poses further threats to our environment. This was a major subject of discussion at the conference in Rio de Janeiro on the environment 2 years ago. The focus then was on sustainable growth and global development. It was pointed out at the conference that growth is most efficiently managed by the private sector, but regulation of the process by national governments and international bodies is also needed. And once again, the United Nations should certainly be among the catalysts and coordinators of this process.
Now, he mentions modern medicine and the way that modern medicine has increased the average lifespan and lowered the infant mortality rate and blah, 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 blah. And how that was all fine and good, but the problem that it created, and the problem, he says, is that there's going to be 6, 7, 8 billion people on the planet, and we're going to use up all the resources, we're going to pollute the environment, and what are we going to do about it? Well, he says it's the United Nations' responsibility. But see, the United Nations isn't a governing body. It's just a body to get together and talk. But that's not what its plan is for. Now, the only way you can institute population control is, number one, decide who gets to have kids, or number two, kill people, or let people die. If something were to happen that would kill a lot of people and they didn't do anything to help, that would let a lot of people die. So a big war, pandemic, and here's where it can branch off into different other theories. Like they start a pandemic, and they start a war that's going to kill a bunch of people. Well, that's the question. Nobody knows what their plan is, but we can see it advancing. Then we can hear people talking about it. And there's not much we can do about it, really. So, I'll have more to say about this in a later show. But I just wanted to get my foot in the door with this. So, this is my opinion. You be the judge. Thanks for listening. I'll catch you next time.